So, NGXS. Let me show the example first. You guys remember that I made login in my application so that I could actually log in and log out with Google. I showed you that part. Let's try and do it. So I log in right here. I press my Google login. I get redirected. I say, yes, I want to log in. And I get thrown back. And now I'm logged in and I can log out. So when I log out again, I'll of course be logged out, right? Now, I've actually changed that behind the scenes. I've changed it to use NGXS. And NGXS is a state management system. So let's just go to the introduction right here. Now, before I do that, all of this is available on Moodle. Let me try and go there so you guys can see what I'm clicking. Current week, if we go down here, you'll notice that when I click NGXS State Management, I'm going to the page I just showed you. And here we have the introduction. And NGXS is Angular's newest way of handling state management. And how should I explain state management? State management it does a lot of things for us. The most important thing is your application will have a single source of truth from a data point of view. And that means that I'll always know what my data should show, even though it might be presented multiple areas in my page, right? So even though I might have a shopping cart in the top corner with an amount of items I bought, and I also have the shopping cart in front of me that shows the items I've bought, they should align, right? So if I delete or remove something from my shopping cart, it should show up right away in my icon in the corner or wherever I'm showing my shopping. So in that case, the store will be my single source of truth, meaning that I actually have almost a local representation of the database in my Angular app. That's one of the main things that my state management is doing. But it's also a way to manage state, right? That's state management. So it's a way for you to say, every time I want to change the way things look, every time I want to do something new, every time I want to change my application, either when a system is being informed from the outside that somebody changed something, like with a chat message, a new chat message was added, there's a change, so the state of the application is changed. But also when I as a user click a button and I change the state of an application. And that could be anything. That could be navigating from one page to another. It could be deleting an item. It could be updating an item. Every time I make a change, it'll kind of be simulated, right? I will call an action, and that action will change the state. And that's what a state management pattern and a state management system is. And that's NGXS. You will probably hear about another one called NGRX. I think that's the name. So NGRX is the first state management system that was built for Angular. And NGRX is built on top of something called Redux that's been created by Facebook. So these guys thought that reactive state management was cool for Angular. So they thought, why not build something so that Angular can also have state management? And as we move forward, you'll start seeing the value of this, but it's extremely complex to comprehend, especially in the beginning. So they also have it right here. And again, we can go further. There's something called Redux. There's a few other systems. But when you search for NGXS questions, you might end up finding answers in NGRX. But you just have to know they're not the same. So you cannot just copy an answer from one to the other. Next question, why not just use NGRX instead of NGXS? And the answer to that is NGRX is, in my mind, a lot harder to understand, especially if you're new. It's really complex. And that's because they have a lot more Some call it boilerplate code. Maybe it's just more code. You have to write a lot more code in NGRX since it's built for JavaScript and not TypeScript. So NGXS is more TypeScript specific, and that means we can start adding some pretty neat things to make it a lot easier to write the code for this. Okay, so that's kind of the difference between these two. None of them are better or worse or anything like that. It's just two different ways of handling the same thing. And for new people, I feel this is easier to comprehend than the other one. So that's kind of why I picked NGXS. I've used it for a while now, and I feel it's getting a lot of traction. People love it, and it's really easy to get started with. And you'll notice right here on Moodle, I have the messages right here, but I also have them up here. So the state will be used across different areas of your application. Like here I have full stack development. I have information here about the full stack, but notice I have the exact same information down here. Now I could get it twice from two different services, or sorry, from the same service twice to show it in this component and in this component if this was an Angular app. But why not instead just get it one time and then just use that data in the two different areas? And that's kind of what we're talking about as the first cool thing with state management, is that we have a single source of truth. If it changed down here, so it was called fifth semester instead, automatically it should also be changed up here, right? It wouldn't, else it would be wrong. It would be bad data, bad coding. Now I could of course have a listener in both areas that listened and then get two events to my app from Firebase. But again, you know that Firebase costs money if you start triggering the events too many times. So if I had it even a third place or fourth place, you would see I would start getting way too many events instead of only having one event with one single source of truth. So controlling the data is one of the major points why we want to do this. So that's kind of the main goal for this. Let's just try and shut this down. So let's try and read a little bit about this before we dive into it. Because again, when you look at this, it's extremely hard to understand. But when you move forward into this world, it actually makes your code a lot easier to comprehend, to be honest. But that's easy for me to say. I used it for a couple of years now, so of course it'll be a tough one to get started with. Let's start right here. NGXS is a state management pattern. Okay, so when you guys write the fifth semester report, if you end up with some kind of state management, try and go and check out the CQRS pattern, and you can actually write a little bit about a new pattern in your report, which is always fun. It's a library for Angular, and it acts as a single source of truth for your application state. Okay, and then we talk about state mutation. That means that whenever we make a change, we can actually monitor, and this is another really, really extremely cool thing. We actually have a way to monitor each step that we did in our application. Not only that, but we can actually navigate in those states. That means that, and this is so freaking cool, because that means that if I want to, when I, for instance, log in and do some changes and log out, I can actually step back. So I can say what happened in each of the different steps. And I'm going to try and prove that to you in a second. So you actually have predictable state mutations, meaning that you can monitor every change that your application make. And that's amazing for debugging. It's not only that, you could actually ask a customer, if you wanted to, you could ask a customer to go into Chrome, add a small plugin, do his steps until he got to the error, and actually copy that and send it to you, and you can follow the exact same steps and open your console and see the actual error live. And it's freaking amazing. So it gives you a lot of power by adding this code. But again, you have to write a bit of code to do it. The reason they talk about supporting Ivy is, if you don't know it, Angular 9, the Angular version we're using, is actually using Ivy now for compiling the code. You don't have to dive into the entire information piece about it, but Ivy is just making our code compilation extremely fast compared to what we had before. So if any of you still have an old Angular application from 7 or 8, and you try and do a deploy or a debug, you'll see it's pretty slow compared to the new Angular using Ivy as the compiler. It's a lot faster. So that's why they mentioned this Ivy part. And then they just want you guys to get started with the concepts. I've added a couple of videos on Moodle for today. It's these two. One of them is our good old friend from Fireship.io. He made a small guide on it. And the other one is another person I found who had a pretty good example on it. This one. The videos are 15 minutes each, but this is also a small tutorial on doing it. They both write a single state class and a single actually the first one writes a single state class. You'll understand what that is. A single state it means that you're going to have all your different entities in a single state, and this guy, he writes it in a more generic way where you have multiple states with multiple types, and that's the one I used for my example right here. But they are both available if you want to kind of check out a video. Good. Again, you have to talk out if you have questions right now, because I can't see the chat. Good. Okay, so if you're new to NGXS, just try and jump into the concepts. So we'll just step over the concepts real quickly. Before we do it, there's a why. You can go and read this one. I pretty much just explained most of it to you, but there's probably some I forgot in here. And there's an installation. Now this is of course important. If you guys want to start using this, you need to do the installation. And again, you should be used to this now. They have an example of both using NPM and using yarn. And the yarn is just another NPM system. So you don't have to use that. Just use NPM. And here we go. We go down and we have, here's a setup. And we don't need that right now. So let's just skip it for now. Because again, in the videos, they explain to you step by step. And I actually think this guide right here, this guide, I also added a link for that one. Let's just try and see this one, great guide on NGXS. You'll see this guide when you jump into that one. And here he actually builds an application from scratch, again using the NPM part. He even installs the CLI. And when he gets further down here, he adds NGX store right here. And then actually here you can do the same. You can say npm install instead of yarn add. And then here he adds a Locker plugin and a Dev plugin. Now these two are really, really cool, and I'll show you in a second. And then he kind of steps through all the creation. You need these modules. You need to do these actions to create a simple to-do app. So maybe this is a good way to get started, just to get a first impression. And you can follow this guide step by step and just create a new Angular app from scratch and just try it all out. I think that's a good way to get started with this on your own. But I will show you using our current setup. I'll show you how I did it. Sweet. The final thing I want to show you in here is just the concepts. First, we have an introduction right here. And there we go. Here we have the idea behind this setup, and this is actually the same idea that you will have with pretty much any any state management system. But in my mind, they made it a little bit simpler, because normally you have some extra pieces. Right here you have 2 or 3 extra pieces, reducers and stuff like that, and they are just, you can easily use them. React uses it a lot. If you use React, you'll learn the word reducers right away, but we don't need them right now. What's going to happen is a component dispatches an action, right? It's just like if you had a button and you did a click, you would dispatch a click event, right? That's kind of the same thing we're doing. We're dispatching an action right here, and the action has the responsibility to change the data in the store, right? So we say we want to change something, maybe we want to add a new user, we send that action. That action knows how to do that and change, maybe he sends a request to the backend, he gets some information back, and the store is then changed. And then the component listens for that change, and the store changes the component, right? So that's how this works. So we dispatch an action, the store listens, so we mutate the store, and using the observer pattern, this guy is informed then of the changed data. That's how it works. But again, the point is that it doesn't matter if I have one component, I have 500 components, they all listen to the single source of truth, which is the store. Good. So let's try and jump into the store and see what that is. This is the overall, this is the major thing you're using. This is the overall state manager, okay? And we create actions, and then we can dispatch these actions inside using this store that is dependency injected. So you only have a single store in your entire application, okay? And then you dispatch actions to the store, and the store will do something. In this case, it'll probably add an animal, and then somebody can listen for this. You can also add multiple by dispatching an array of commands, etc. I don't want to dive into all of these. I'll show you an example, but here you can find some of the more complex examples. Also, here's actually how you start listening, adding this select right here. You can actually start listening for different changes. So here I'm saying I want to listen for the state for all animals in my application, and then I have an observable that can listen for these animals. I know this is rocket science right now, and I hope by showing you a simple example with our authentication after a break, you guys it can make more sense. Okay, so just live with it for now. Then we have actions. So again, the store is like the global service that takes care of managing our single source of truth, if that makes sense. Then we have the actions. The actions, they are the ones that you send to inform that something changed. The state needs to be changed. Okay, that triggers an action. And you can create actions yourself like this. That's how an action actually looks. You give it a name, a type, and you say, for instance, in square brackets, now this is the standard that they decided to use in NGXS. So this is very NGXS specific. They say the type you want to use, it needs to have a name. So this is for the SU area. If it was authentication, it might be called auth. If it was for product, maybe it would say product right here. This is a basic name for all actions belonging to that category. So this is the SU category. And for the SU category, I have one called feed animals. Okay, so this is the action, how simple it is to create an action. You can also, if an action needs data from the outside, so maybe you want to create a new animal or you want to feed a zebra, you need to send information. So here's again, we have the category, we have the action name, and then now we send in the constructor some extra information. How much hay should the zebra have? And then here again is how you can dispatch an action. Here we explain how the action should be written. And again, you can go and read those examples if you want to. Here's how you should group your actions, how they encourage you to do it. So here we have the to-do. We have so you shouldn't say to-do. Here it is, you should add namespace, right? And then you should say add, edit. Again, I don't care about that. I won't flame anyone for not having the namespace, but it just makes it easier, right? You have the to-do namespace, and then you add, edit, fetch, delete, instead of having add to-do, edit to-do. I actually used the old way. I didn't use the namespace, so again, it's not a concern. Good. So now that you guys can patch actions and can send those, you can dispatch them. Every time you send an action, it's going to change the state of the system. So the state is like your local database, right? That represents all data in your system. So here you can have multiple different states. So you can have a state for your products, state for your authentication, state for your routing, state for your, in this case, animal. You can have different states. And this is what a state looks like. And you have to do something similar to this or else it'll fail. So you have to, first of all, have a state right here with a decorator. And in this case, the state is of type string array. And then you have to add kind of the definition of what the state should be, right? We'll do that in a second as well after the break. Then you have to add this injectable to make the state into service. So it's injectable. And then you put in a name for the state. And again, you can have multiple states. I've made one for authentication that I'll show you. Again, there's a good description on what the state could look like. And then in this case right here, and that's the same I did, we add the service into the state. And what does this mean? This means that we are going to move all our services. We're going to remove those from the components. So we are not going to use services in our components anymore. We are just going to have in the component, we're going to end up having like, it's pretty much a facade. We're going to have a facade called store, and he's going to communicate to the services. So that means we're going to make a bit of change in the way that we code now in our app. The components are not going to know anything about services anymore. They're going to know about a store that knows about the services. Okay, so the store is going to be kind of a facade of some kind. We don't care about the tokens right now. We can get back to those later. And then this could be an action right here inside a state. And you kind of bind together. So if we go back to the action right here, and we have an action right here called feed animals. This is an action. You bind that action to the state right here by saying, I want to create an action now again with a decorator. You add this action and you say, this is the action for feed animals that I'm going to create a function for right here. What should happen when somebody wants to change the zoo state by feeding animals? What should happen? And then you kind of have some boilerplate code here where you say, this is the method that I want to change. And then I can send in the context. And the context, the most important thing to know is that it contains the current state, the way the zoo looks right now. Okay, so the context is just a way for me to say, this is how the truth is right now for my data locally. And then with that context, I can now get the state, meaning that I'm getting all the data from in here. And then I can go and say, set the state. And this is kind of weird, but the tree.state means that I want to use it as it is right now. So the name is still going to be Sue, right? And every piece inside this default is still going to be the same, except I'm going to change, in this case there's only one, but if there was multiple properties here, it would say all the other ones would be the same, but I will change the one with feed in the end and convert it into false, true instead of false. Yeah, it's tough. And I'll also just show you an action with a payload right here, because if you do have a payload like with the feed zebra, the one we looked at as well, you can actually use that payload and get that payload back. With right here, I say I have, like we did before, I have the Sue state, but I can also pass in the actual action that made the change. And from that action, I can actually now get the zebra to feed. Okay. So that's how you're passing information. There's also one called pet state. So it's just an easier way to do an update. So now it'll only update, again, like we said before, it'll only update the ones that are needed. Sweet. The rest is just to make it, I've used a different way of getting the context. I'll show you. It's just another way of doing that, and I'll show you in a second as well. Good. This is an important one. This is a little bit about async actions and how you can use those. And that's of course, again, if we have an action that needs to wait for response, you can do that as well. So here's how you do it with a tap function. So again, now we actually use the tap for something valuable, right? We have the pipe and then we tap into the data, we set the state, and then we're kind of done. That's an amazing feature as well. Okie doke. You can do the same with the wait if you want to, like we talked about in TypeScript. Let's try and look at the final one, and then we'll have a break. The select one. So select is the way we get data. So that's the only way you get data now. You don't use a service to get data. You don't get from the store. In the video, he actually shows two examples. He shows that you can actually go to the store and get, let's see if I can find an example right here. Yeah, you can actually go to the store and say select a specific state, and then you get an observable back, just like you're used to. This is the way that you're used to actually writing with an observable. You could do it like this. Remember, you could say user service dot get users, and then you would get an observable back, and then you could add an async inside your code for that one. But it's a lot easier to use, let's just go back here, to use this syntax, because that'll do exactly the same and you won't have to create anything in your constructor or anything like that. That's pretty amazing. Again, I'll show an example, so don't worry about it right now. I'm just trying to give you guys an overview about all the things you can do with this. Yeah, I don't think you're going to use memorize selectors and stuff like that, so we're not going to look into that right now. Dynamic selectors, also advanced stuff. We don't want to look into that now. We'll look into that Wednesday and just have a talk about some more advanced scenarios. Also joining selectors and stuff like that. Again, we'll look into that later, right? So don't worry about all this in the end right here. Sweet. So that's the introduction to NGXS. That's just a baseline introduction. And you can find everything about the concepts and everything in here. You can find some good videos about it right here that will help you. And you can find a great guide right here that'll get you started with the first example of using NGXS from scratch. You can pretty much copy paste everything. Just try to understand as much as possible. And you are up and running.